Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everybody. I love you all. My name is miahtheking, and today at the bank, an old lady asked me to check her balance, so I pushed her over. Alright, thanks so much for clicking on my video. It means a lot to me, and if you're wondering why you clicked here at all, then let me help you figure it out. It's for the corny jokes at the start of each video, or perhaps because I'm one of the few reviewers out there who can help you figure out if you need this game in 10 minutes or less. So stick around and give me a chance, won't you? Now then, today we're taking a look at a game just released on Steam called Arcane Wilds, a resource management RTS, or so it says. Developed and published by Avancadia, hope I'm pronouncing that right, released in early access and selling for $18. And I gotta say, first off, before anything, these devs seem pretty legit. Game had issues upon release, and after a few minutes of asking them about it, they fixed it. So I wanted to give a special shout out, thanks to the devs, and props to them. Thanks for that. Alright, so let's actually get into this game, shall we? So what is this game? Well, it's kind of tricky. The game is super early access, I think. It's also very obscure, and not a lot of people know about it, I think. Now, why am I looking at it? Because it sounded interesting to me, as well as I don't really have a lot of other content to review lately. So this game is, well, it's an RTS. It's gunpowder meets magic and fantasy, kind of like the Steam store page describes, which the idea actually really interests me. It doesn't really have a story, though. It doesn't really have a whole lot of anything. It's too early, but it's basically a different look at the resource management kind of genre in terms of RTS. It basically takes the whole RTS genre and just does it differently from what I've seen in the past. So let's just dive into the good and the bad and find out if you want to give this game a shot or not. So up first for the positives, for me at least, was the sound design. There was very limited voice acting, but when I did hear it, it actually sounded decent, like your troops making sounds or saying things, like that's the kind of voice acting I'm talking about, and it sounded pretty good. The music was also really interesting to me as well. If you hear any weird noise in the background, I apologize, they're doing construction nearby, so sorry about that, and I gotta do this now. Now, I don't actually know why, but I really liked the background music and thought it fit the game perfectly. The sound effects for a low-budget looking game also sounded pretty legit. Magic sounded good, combat sounded good, and overall, the game's sound design just wasn't half bad. Next up for the positives is the stability. Despite being in early access, I didn't notice a single bug or glitch anywhere. Okay, well, maybe one. Okay, fine, so it's not perfect. However, the game ran really smooth without ever dropping frames, bugging out, clipping, tearing, freezing, or anything else. It was running way smoother than I thought that it would. And last but not least is the gameplay. Now, this is also going to be in the negatives, but I still wanted to make mention of the good here first. So, the idea is okay, I guess. Perhaps it just needs to be implemented better, but overall, it's very reminiscent of older RTS games like Age of Empires or Rise of Nations or Age of Mythology or whatever. Building buildings to build troops, wrap a wall around yourself, send them to attack in large mobs, and then just watch them go. With little objectives here and there, markers, and overall similar mechanics to games I grew up on. So, they're using an older formula, but it works.
It's an older code, sir, but it checks out.
So it's really hard for me to give the gameplay a lot of lip when it's very similar to just older, greater titles that I grew up on. Basically, if you like the older styles of gameplay RTS, then you're going to feel right at home here. But for more specifics, well, basically your harbor is your town center, your workers are called engineers, and you only have the one resource to build everything, which is wood. At least I think, it just says resource, it doesn't even say wood. Now you also need materials for your troops, technically, but it's basically just a population limit on how many troops you can build at once, so I don't really count it as a resource. The game comes with a boring but decent enough tutorial, it comes with a campaign, and it has online capabilities. Along with the online PvP aspect, you can also have people come and join your campaign, drop in, drop out, and fight alongside you, which I thought that was a really cool, interesting idea. You can adjust the difficulty when you're on the campaign, and it's pretty much fairly standard all around. So I want to talk about the graphics, but they're not awesome. This isn't really a positive, it's just something I want to make mention of. I can't really talk about how good the game looks, because it doesn't really look that good. It looks slightly below average in my opinion. But it's still not bad, not like terrible. But what I actually wanted to make mention of was the animations. Now the animations of the units are actually pretty smooth and really surprisingly well done actually. Watching them fight, watching them hop on and off a horse or grab resources or build something or whatever, like the animations were just really smooth, realistic, and actually looked good. But everything else about the graphics was pretty average or below average. Alright, so that's all I got to say positively about the game. Now on to the negatives. But before that, if you find yourself entertained or at least informed about my video, then consider joining my Royal Guard. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you hit that bell too. After all, that bell tells you whenever I release a new video, and I do so at very random times with very random games. And you never know when I'll review a game that you've been missing out on your whole life, so stay informed and hit that bell. Now then, on to the negatives, and I think I'll first talk about the gameplay since it was also in the positives. So the gameplay is almost good, and perhaps it just needs to finish cooking, but it has a lot of issues currently. For instance, there's no way to have your units automatically collect resources. Oh sure, the workers will grab wood and automatically bring it back to the harbor, but no one else does this with any other resource or anything else. You gotta tell them to go mine this weird fantasy ore. Well, they do it, but then they take forever. They do it forever. They never take it back to the base. You can tell your horse-drawn cart to go grab resources, but then after he grabs them, he just sits there. And there's no way to just get them to do it on their own. You have to micromanage everything. And for a game like this, I was actually surprised to see it because that shouldn't be here. It's not supposed to be here, not in this kind of format. If you tell your engineers to build something just a smidge too far away from your harbor, then they just give up and they'll stop building entirely, and you have to manually tell them to finish building the construction job, which leads me to my next problem. They have to carry the resources on their backs for each thing they build. So every time they need to build a new building in the queue you gave them, they have to end up running back to the harbor to pick up resources, then to go all the way back to build it. Again, for a game like this, it just seems like a bad design choice. It seems superfluous. As for the combat, well, it's mostly okay, kind of typical for these kinds of games, but the attack move button doesn't always seem to work, which leads me into my next negative, the user interface. So it's kind of badly made in my opinion. It's ugly, it's hard to differentiate between different things with text too small, not enough icons or signifiers on your screen. I mean, it took me forever to realize the difference between wood, population, and materials because the game did such a poor job of showing them off to me. The trees are indestructible, so they never get chopped down, so they're always there, so there's never really a need to build more than the 12 workers or another harbor or anything. In terms of those little circles under every unit you see in a lot of these games, like the thing that, lets you know that you've got a certain person selected or whatever, well, they're all colored white. So for everyone, and that's everybody, for your troops, for enemy troops, for neutral troops, it's all white. So you never know who's hostile, who's neutral, or who you control. Normally it's green and red, so I don't know why that's not here. There's also no real cue for you to know how many of what types of troops you're building, which makes it hard to remember how many specific soldiers you built or workers you built or whatever. Basically, the game is missing a lot in terms of important text and notifiers about managing your base and your troops for an RTS game, and those are kind of important here. Next up for the negatives is the price tag. Considering what the game is currently offering and where it looks like it could lead or what might be there or what you're currently paying for, the price tag is almost appropriate. I think they have maybe priced it a bit too much. Like, come on guys, or girl, or whoever developed this, $18? Come on, you were so close to having a proper price tag. I mean, let's face it, the game is unknown with nobody playing it. And this is on opening day when it's supposed to have the most amount of people playing it. And it's not finished, it's not doing anything new or innovative, it's not massive, and overall it's just not giving me $18 worth of fun or content. Hell, I struggled just to make a review on it because of how little there is to talk about here. This is a $10 game. Price tag needs to be adjusted. Maybe when it's fully released, depending on how much more content you want to jam in there, it could maybe be worth $18 or $20. But right now, it's just not worth more than $10. Older graphics, older UI, older sound design, older gameplay idea, and it's not even finished. Come on, $10 would be appropriate. Now, I could go into more detail about everything else with the game, what's wrong with it and what I liked about it, but I'd basically be nitpicking, and let's face it, nobody wants to hear that. So, the game is early access, and obviously there's more to come, so I can't really use a lot of what might be missing or whatever, or nitpicking for judging the game. All I can say is that currently, with what I've experienced and what I've seen, and from what's there, it's worth $10, and that's all I can say about the pros and cons. That's pretty much all I can say. So what are my final thoughts? Well, I think the game is below average in terms of RTS games, and that's not even including RTS games of my past. That's of today's standards. If I was comparing this game to Age of Empires or much older RTS games, this would have a far worse rating. But again, it's early access and it might end up getting a lot better. But for me, I'd hate to say I don't recommend it because the dev or devs are working hard on it, but it's not really ready for consumption in my opinion. It's got too many flaws, it still has a lot of work that needs to be done, there's still a lot missing, and it's just not worth its asking price. I basically judge games on if they're worth the asking price, or the time it takes to learn and play them and get into them, or if I'm having fun, or if it's got a good repetitive idea, and then determine if I should recommend it or not. And unfortunately, I was bored while I was playing it, I wasn't really engaged, I didn't really care, I wasn't really having fun. I mean, is it a good foundation for something in the future? Sure, possibly. I think eventually it might be worth the current asking price when it's finished, but not until then. There's no one online to play with, and the campaign is too lackluster and boring to get into. So why would you? What is the pull of this game? What is the reason to go out and buy this game and play this instead of Age of Empires 2, 3, 4, or even the first one? There's not a reason, and that's the problem. I love the idea of gunpowder meeting magic, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and a different look at resource management, but in the game's current state, I just can't recommend it. I mean, if you're super interested in this game, then I'd still suggest that you just put it on your wish list and keep an eye on it until it has more of its flaws worked out and whatnot. Alright, everybody? Otherwise, move on to a better RTS. Alright, so again, I hate to say it, but I just gotta be honest. So that's all the time I got for today's video, everybody. Thanks so much for watching, with a special thanks to those of you who stuck around to the end. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you all again on my next adventure. So until then, I bid you all farewell.